So, what can a church do to safeguard the kids in their care? Well, we gathered a group of experts who deal with preventing and responding to child sexual abuse cases. We'll hear from Roger Duffield, Ron Ercole, Steve Henney, Michael Bland, and our facilitator, Peter Persuti. Here's what they had to say.
Maybe the first question is, why do we have sex offenders in our church communities?
You boil it down to the fact that we live in a broken and fallen world. The reality is anybody has the potential to move down a pathway that is not healthy, that does not respect the boundaries of other individuals, and slowly move themselves to a path where they could harm another individual.
It's first of all important to state the reality. Sexual offenders are part of all faith communities. Child sexual abuse has become a household term.
One of the cases that I had that we've recently been involved in, the gentleman had worked at the daycare worker, or as a daycare center for about 3 years. The reason was he'd gotten divorced, he wanted to be near his son, and they had done a little bit of a background check, but not a full background check. And then 3 years into it, about 5 years ago, over a summer period of time, they moved the room that the kids were in to a back area where they couldn't observe and walk by and make sure that nothing was going on. And that's when the abuse took place. When I look at it, from my experience, I still have kind of a hard time believing that this guy was a perpetrator or a pedophile, because he just didn't show any of those types of traits prior to that. But he pled guilty, and he's sitting in jail for life now because of that incident.
When I came on staff, I kind of put on that offender eye and thought, where would I go? And I knew that we had our children's ministries kind of covered, and we were screening them, and I wouldn't go there. I'd go to a ministry or some other place where minors are serving. Not where they're being served, like in a child's ministry, but where they are serving, especially the teenagers. And there's a high rate of abuse of teenagers that is often not reported. We always think about the little children, but teenagers are often more susceptible, and any one of a number of ways. We could talk about it in terms of, rage and anger, all the way to the point of sexual abuse.
Most offenders know their victims. It is not strangers abusing children.
Yeah.
It is people who are known to them. So if the offender is looking for a child-friendly environment where good works is rewarded, where it's a community environment, where interaction with children is encouraged, and they can have easy access, we're somewhat talking about the church. In any denomination, offenders look for child-nurturing environments, and faith communities are child-nurturing.
Does anybody want to comment maybe about why you think there is an uptick in claims? Is it any different from 20 years ago in terms of the offenses or whatever?
I don't know that I see an uptick in claims, but I mirror exactly what you've said, Steve, is we see it less with clergy and more with staff and personnel and even volunteers. What we see is kind of somebody doesn't go in through the normal system. They may be a part-time worker or volunteer just going to help out with this program. They kind of bypass the regular protocols, either out of convenience or need or what have you, and that's where we're seeing our issues.
I would think that the reason why we are experiencing an increase in claims or an increase in allegations is simply because of awareness. Both children and parents have been taught to be able to talk about sexual abuse, to be able to talk about feeling uncomfortable when someone touches them or grooms them. They first groom the children to be able to say they're a good person, that they can be friendly, maybe you could bend the rules with me a little bit, maybe you could, use dirty language, or we could go off by ourselves, or I'll give you rewards or gifts or presents without your parents knowing. But at the same time, offenders groom the adult community around them as well.
Exactly.
That they are often very charismatic people, very giving people, very genuine people who have a lot of gifts and talents to share within a community, and therefore most faith communities welcome them. And even within that, I know in various communities that I've been involved in, some of them have said, well, you know, I've done this for so many years, why don't they trust me now? Or this isn't right, or of course I should be able to do this. And I think the answer has to be twofold. Yes, it is out of the reality of sexual abuse, and yes, it is to keep children safe. But I think we have to stop and acknowledge it keeps the adults safe.
Absolutely.
Because although it's a very small percentage, there are some false allegations. And if there's a second adult present who is not related, who is just in a ministry with someone, can say, I was there and you were not alone with a child. So the two-adult rule is not only for the safety of children, it is for the safety of the congregation as well as the individual adults involved.
It's one thing to have good ideas, but if you don't have a structure in place that really keeps the ball moving forward and keeps that issue of protection alive, it will eventually die out.
One of the things we wanted to talk about was this whole issue of the damages, and the damages could begin with you, Steve, relative to the quantifiable aspects.
A lot of this has not been covered. So overall, though, just to use an example, the Catholic Church has probably paid out in excess of $2 billion. This takes away money from the church that they could use for other stewardships that the church would have. And I don't think people really take that into full appreciation. And then I think there really is almost a non-monetary type of aspect to this too that I don't think gets factored in, and that's, you know, parishioners or attendees of the church becoming disillusioned with what's going on and the fact that they don't feel their church has addressed it properly, and therefore they're leaving the church and they're maybe going to a different denomination. You know, you can quantify a lot of this, but there's also a lot of non-quantifiable.
When we start looking at the rippling effect, it does affect then a whole congregation, not only financially, but emotionally and from a faith base. You know, we start asking the famous questions of what if and why, and there's not always answers. In our own faith communities and in our ministries, I would say if we are able to identify that child sexual abuse is a reality in our society, even if it's not one of our ministers or clergy persons doing the abuse, fathers, stepfathers, uncles, our church members are being abused. And what are we going to do about it? And in our faith communities, what we have to be able to present is that child sexual abuse will not be tolerated in our faith communities.
A lot of times, allegations that come forward or concerns that volunteers may have aren't about something that's happening with one of the volunteers, but a child comes in with a bruise, or they seem to be acting differently. And it's not just a particular bruise, but it may be, especially in terms of a pattern. This child always seems to be coming in with bruises, or used to be very happy and outgoing, and now they're quiet, and now they're fearful of certain people, maybe within the ministry. I don't want to be near that person. Can I go be a part of this group or something else? With adolescents, you may see a host of different kinds of things, a lot more acting out behavior, getting promiscuous or cutting themselves, ways that they're basically trying to say, something's wrong, I don't know how to handle this, help me, see my signs.
Child sexual abuse is not denominational. It is a public health issue. It is looking for leaders for a solution in keeping children safe, reaching out to victims and survivors, and identifying offenders. The church of every denomination that faces the reality of child sexual abuse is losing a lot of their stewardship in their money, in their resources, in their faith, and in their credibility. And that's why we have to realize that this is a public health issue that is crying out for a leader, and let that leader be our faith communities.